are the impediments? Well, joining me live from the Iranian capital is Mohammad Marandi, Professor of North American Studies at Tehran University. Thank you for joining us, sir. While at the Brookings Institution in Washington, we have the former CIA analyst Bruce Riedel. And from our Washington bureau tonight is Reza Marashi from the National Iranian-American Council. So you've been pushing for a thawing of relations and some sort of engagement for some time. So your expectations, I assume, are high this week. Just walk us through what you believe we might expect.
Well, I think expectations should be high but realistic. We should always have high expectations of our political leaders, whether we're in Washington or Tehran. But what we've seen so far has been very positive. It's not just been more potentially fruitful rhetoric coming from Washington and Tehran, but also tangible actions that we should consider to be very groundbreaking. You have an American Secretary of State in John Kerry and an Iranian foreign minister in Mohammad Javad Zarif, who are going to be spearheading negotiations within the P5+1 context, the UN Security Council plus Germany. That's huge, and that's a step in the right direction. It's high-level ownership of this very important national security issue.
Mohammed, positive in Tehran tonight?
Yes, I agree. I think on the whole it's positive, although I think people here are still quite cautious. There's the issue of whether Obama actually can deliver, because many of the sanctions which are directed at ordinary Iranians have been passed by Congress and the Senate, and it's quite unclear whether he has any leverage to have these sanctions removed. And there's also what the Iranians believe is a need for the United States to change its mentality towards Iran and to accept Iran's nuclear program within the framework of international law. If the United States can do that and it can change this mentality, then I think the Iranians would be quite flexible, more flexible, and to help reassure Western countries if they have any fears about the nuclear program.
Bruce, isn't one of the problems here that the US foreign policy community has simply failed to lay out at this stage what it wants, saying only that it wants the suspension of uranium enrichment without offering much on these sanctions, sanction relief in return? That is a problem, I know, not just for Tehran, but for the Europeans involved in the P5+1 talks as well.
And the president didn't talk about sanctions release very much in his speech at the UNGA today. It was notable for not pointing out that carrot. He had a couple of other carrots. He said America was not interested in regime change. He acknowledged that Iranians had been gassed in the Iran-Iraq war, which I think is a very important point for Iranians. And he said that he accepted that the Supreme Leader and Rouhani have both said Iran doesn't want nuclear weapons. But you're right, he didn't talk very much about what the United States is putting on the table in terms of sanctions release.
Reza, although he didn't make the tie explicit in his speech, is it likely that Obama and Washington want the ongoing war in Syria, of course, which Iran plays a big role in supporting Assad in, will they want that as a component of any larger US-Iran debate, do you think?
I think
well, that's another thing that I was looking for. Is he offering Iran a seat at the table at any kind of Geneva II conference that deals with the future of Syria? Iran is a direct military participant in this war now. It is providing billions of dollars in aid to the Alawite government of President Assad, which is a significant strain on Tehran today. We didn't hear whether the Iranians would be invited to that table. Now, we're early stages. There's a lot that's just beginning, and I agree with both of the other speakers that this is positive so far, but the details are the devil, and we still need to see a lot more of those details.
Yeah, sorry, Reza, you were just talked over a little bit there. Your point.
I think it's an important question to see whether or not the Iranians or the Americans are willing to budge on their previous positions on Syria. I think so far, in recent weeks at least, I should say, we've seen some positive movement. There's been an acknowledgement that neither side can find a political solution on their own that will stop the killing of Syrians. So perhaps it's worthwhile having these kinds of discussions. There's still some details that need to be ironed out, but I think it's safe to say that we're in a better position now that the track has shifted more towards diplomacy than we were just a couple of weeks ago when it was more of a hardened stance.
Mohammed, there are winners and potential losers in all of this. Iran, the US, and those who do business with Tehran will be looking for this thawing of relations and bilateral and multilateral relations going forward. Israel and perhaps other Arab dictators, not so much, right?
Well, I think since Iran is the most important pillar of stability in this region right now, in this uproar that we see that Iran is the only state that is completely stable. It's had very important elections recently and a very high turnout. If this region if the United States and Western countries do not want this region to collapse further, then they need Iran more than before. And the Iranians are quite willing to help resolve the situation in Syria. In fact, the Iranians are mystified that the United States has chosen allies in Syria, directly or indirectly, it doesn't matter, which are the same forces that the United States launched the war on terror because of. In other words, Al-Qaeda, which carried out attacks on the United States, are now on the same side of the battlefield, more or less, as the United States. But if the United States changes its attitude towards Iran, I think that the situation in Syria can be resolved through free and fair elections, along with international monitors, and the situation in Iraq and other parts of the region can stabilize. But at the end of the day, if the United States doesn't come to some sort of rapprochement with Iran, I think the situation across the board will simply deteriorate.
To the two of you who are in Washington, Bruce, it seemed to me in the past that Washington has simply had two speeds. It's either sanctions on Iran or asleep. In fact, somebody wrote that in what I would suggest was some expert analysis that I read earlier on, sanctions or asleep. The Iranians certainly giving the impression that they are prepared to bend. But I think they use the analogy of a wrestler. You know, that wrestler can bend, but in the end, he'll get up and fight again if he doesn't think he's getting his way. It's really important that it's clear what will be discussed and what will be conceded on, I think, isn't it, in the next couple of days?
We're right. We need concrete, specific proposals. We need to come up with a way of turning the supreme leader's commitment that Iran won't seek to acquire nuclear weapons into something the international community can have confidence in. That can be done through inspection regimes. It can be done through additional protocols from the IAEA. That's what we need to see. That's what Secretary Kerry and his Iranian counterpart need to get down and speak to the specifics and the details when they meet later in this week. We've had the good sounding music to get started. That's important. We're not asleep anymore. But we need to now talk about sanctions, inspections, and the hard details.
We've just got a minute or so left. Reza, we are expecting to hear from Rouhani, who is due to speak in less than an hour, a little bit late at the UNGA, as they always are. Briefly, wrap this up for us. What do you expect to hear from him today? Anything that we haven't heard in the past couple of weeks?
Oh, what a difference an Iranian president can make when it comes to style. And what we're hoping to see is a shift in substance as well. I think you're going to hear a more conciliatory tone without giving up what Rouhani and others inside of Iran perceive to be Iran's rights. You're going to see a willingness to engage diplomatically with the United States and the broader international community. And you're going to hear some signals, I think, that he puts out in his speech that speak to his willingness and his government's willingness to engage. Again, the process is just getting started. The devil's in the details, but I think this is a good start, and now it's time to turn words into actions.
Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure out of Tehran and Washington for us this evening. We thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, this, we are told, will now not be President Obama's China